What if the path you seek is invisible, only revealed when you take that first step? Follow the journey of trust, and discover how faith can make the impossible possible. The sun was beginning its descent over the rugged hills of Galilee, casting a soft orange glow over the countryside. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the olive trees, carrying with it the scent of earth and the promise of evening coolness. The disciples had gathered around a fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Some were sitting on the grass while others stood talking quietly among themselves. Jesus sat at the center, his presence calm and serene, yet there was an intensity in his gaze that hinted at something deeper. His disciples were restless. The journey had been long, and despite their faith, the path ahead felt uncertain. Peter, ever the bold one, was the first to break the silence. "Master," he said, his voice carrying a hint of frustration, "we have followed you through villages and towns, through barren lands and crowded streets. Yet the way ahead seems unclear. How are we to know what to do next?" Jesus looked at Peter with a knowing smile. His words were gentle, yet they struck deep within the hearts of those listening. "Do you seek a clear path, Peter? Do you desire a road that is always laid out before you, visible and secure?" Peter frowned, unsure how to answer. He had been following Jesus for so long, but at times, it felt as though the path was elusive, fading into the unknown. Matthew, sitting across from Peter, looked down at the ground, his brow furrowed in thought. "But Master," he interjected, "if we cannot see the road, how do we know where to go? How do we know if we are walking in the right direction?" Jesus' gaze softened as he turned to face Matthew. "Come," he said, rising to his feet. "Let me show you something." The disciples followed, curiosity piqued. They walked in silence through the village, out into the surrounding wilderness. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped lower. Eventually they reached a quiet clearing surrounded by towering trees. Jesus stopped and looked out over the vast emptiness. "I want to tell you a story," he began, his voice calm yet filled with authority. "Once there was a traveler," Jesus began, "who found himself walking through a barren land. There was no road, no path to follow, only an endless stretch of empty desert. He had been walking for days, unsure of where he was headed, unsure of how to find his way. The disciples gathered closer, drawn into the story. Each of them, in their own way, could relate to the feeling of wandering without direction. The traveler grew weary and began to lose hope," Jesus continued. His feet ached, his throat was dry, and the land seemed to stretch on forever. He sat down beneath a tree, exhausted and defeated. It was then that he heard a voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper on the wind. But it was clear, unmistakable. Jesus paused for a moment, letting the weight of the story settle in. The disciples held their breath, eager to hear more. The voice said, "Trust me. Take one step forward and you will see the way." "Did he take the step?" John asked eagerly, his eyes wide with anticipation. Jesus nodded. "He did." With great hesitation, the traveler stood, uncertain but willing to trust. He took one step forward, and as his foot met the ground, something miraculous happened. The earth beneath him shimmered, revealing a road, a path that had been invisible before. He gasped, surprised by what he saw. The disciples looked at each other in awe. They felt the excitement of discovery as if they, too, were standing at the edge of a great revelation. With each step the traveler took, Jesus continued, the road became clearer, winding through the wilderness, leading him toward his destination. And as he walked, he found that the road not only guided him but also brought him peace. The further he went, the more he understood. Each step was an act of trust. Only when he moved forward did the road appear. The fire crackled as Jesus finished the story, the warm light dancing on the faces of his disciples. They were silent for a moment, each person reflecting on the message. Peter, ever the one to seek clarity, broke the silence. "But Master," he said, his voice uncertain, "how can we be sure? What if the road doesn't appear? What if we take a step and find only emptiness? Jesus smiled gently, his eyes full of compassion. Peter, the road only appears when you trust and take the step. You must not wait for the road to be visible from the start. The road will not appear until you act. You must trust that I am with you, even when you cannot see the way. Thomas, sitting at the edge of the group, looked up with a skeptical expression. But what if we make a mistake? What if we walk in the wrong direction? Jesus' gaze softened as he looked at Thomas. Even if you stumble, even if you fall, I am with you. The road is not always about perfection. It is about trust and action. And through your actions you will find the path. Mary Magdalene, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. I understand, she said softly. It's not about knowing everything ahead of time. It's about trusting that God will guide us, even when we can't see the way. Jesus nodded, his heart warmed by her words. Exactly. Trust is the key. And through trust, you will find that the road is never truly invisible. It only requires your willingness to walk it. The disciples returned to the camp, their hearts heavy with the weight of Jesus' words. As they sat around the fire that evening, each of them reflected on the story, the invisible road, the traveler's trust, and the challenge of taking that first step. Matthew sat apart from the others, deep in thought. He had been struggling with doubt, unsure of his place in the world. He had left everything behind to follow Jesus, but there were times when the uncertainty of his journey felt overwhelming. Lord, he whispered almost to himself, how do I know when it's time to take that first step? Jesus, sensing his inner turmoil, walked over to him. Matthew, he said softly, the first step is always the hardest. But remember, the road only appears when you trust and move forward. You may not know what lies ahead, but with each step, the way will be made clear. Matthew nodded slowly, his heart swelling with a new sense of determination. Perhaps it was time to stop waiting for signs and simply move forward, trusting that God would guide him. Days passed and the disciples continued their journey. As they traveled, they encountered rough terrain, unpredictable weather, and moments of uncertainty. But with each challenge, the message of the invisible road lingered in their hearts. One evening, as they camped near a river, Peter sat alone by the water, wrestling with doubt. The road ahead still felt unclear, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was truly on the right path. Lord, he prayed quietly, show me the way. Help me trust when I cannot see. Jesus approached him quietly, sitting beside him by the water. Peter, he said gently, trust is not always easy. But remember the traveler. He did not see the road until he took the first step. You too must take that step. Peter looked at Jesus, his eyes filled with vulnerability. But what if I fail? Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. Peter, it is not failure that matters, it is your willingness to trust and move forward. The road will be made clear by your steps. The next day, as the disciples continued their journey, they reached a dense forest. The path ahead seemed completely obscured, and for a moment they felt lost. The trees were thick, the sky clouded over, and the trail was nowhere to be seen. But then, remembering the story of the invisible road, they took a collective breath and moved forward, trusting that the path would appear as they walked. And as they did, the road began to shimmer in the distance. It was faint at first, but with each step, it grew clearer and more defined. The disciples marveled at what they saw. The road had always been there, waiting for them to trust and take the first step. As they walked through the forest, a heavy silence fell over the group. Each disciple was lost in their thoughts, reflecting on their journey. But Thomas, ever the skeptic, couldn't shake the doubts that lingered in his heart. What if the road we see is just an illusion? He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. What if we're walking in circles? Jesus turned to him, his expression calm but firm. Thomas, doubt is natural. But remember, the road only appears when you take the first step. Trust is the key, even when you cannot see the path clearly. As the days passed, the disciples found that the road ahead grew clearer with each step. But more than just the path, they were beginning to understand the deeper meaning of Jesus' message. They were not just walking through a wilderness of the land. They were walking through the wilderness of their own fears and doubts, learning to trust in God's guidance. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Peter spoke up. I finally understand, Master, he said, his voice filled with awe. It's not the road that we must see first. It's the trust we place in you and in each other that reveals the path. Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with love. Exactly, Peter. Trust is the key that unlocks the path before you. And as you walk by faith, step by step, you will find your way. As the disciples journeyed forward, they came to a place where the road seemed to disappear into the horizon. It was a place of transition, a place of testing. But they no longer feared the unknown. They knew that as long as they walked with trust and action, the road would always appear before them. They had learned through their journey and through Jesus' teachings that faith is not about knowing everything ahead of time. It is about trusting in each step and allowing the road to unfold as they moved forward. The disciples stood on the edge of a new horizon, looking out at the path that lay before them. They had walked far through wilderness and uncertainty, but they had also walked with trust and faith. The road was no longer invisible. And as they stood there, Jesus spoke his final words to them. "You have learned well," he said, his voice filled with love and wisdom. "The road before you will always be uncertain, but as long as you trust and take the first step, you will always find your way." With that, the disciples took a collective breath, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, they had the strength and the faith to continue the journey. The invisible road had become visible not because they had seen it from the start, but because they had trusted enough to walk it step by step. And with that trust, the road ahead was theirs to follow. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.